Change hit in the air to deep right field. That goes Clemente. And the save. He's done. Get out of here, baseball. It's gone. Oh, my God. Can you believe it? Johnny Bench has tied it up. The Cincinnati Reds win the World Series in 4 straight. It was a sweep. In the dirt. It's a wild pitch. Here comes Foster. The Reds win the pennant. Perkins won the game. That ball is fair. Cincinnati's ahead. 2 games to none. Welcome, Joe Orlando to Cincinnati. Adam Dunn has done it again. Benzinger backing and calling. And the 1990 World Championship belongs to the Cincinnati Reds.
Marty, yes. This is Adam from Milwaukee. Hey, Adam, how you doing? I'm good. How are you? Good. Do you think Scott Chatterbox is a good player?
Dunn up there with the bases loaded, the outfield deep and around toward right, and the 1-0 on the way to the plate. Swung on, long drive, right field, and this one belongs to the Reds.
And a high drive, hit back into deep right field. Junior has just knocked the door down to the 500 club. Benson's first home run is a walk-off winner. That ball had a family.
And De La Cruz is, oh my goodness, look at this kid run. My, oh my, that is a triple.
Matt McClain's first big league bomb. Spencer Steer's first big league hit is a home run to straightaway center field. Joey Votto's done it again. The pitch. Votto swings high in the air. Right field. Yes! He pointed to the dugout to say, I told you. That is Joey Votto's 315th career go-ahead ribby. Only Johnny Bench had more as a Red.
And I can't tell you how much it means to play in front of everyone here in Cincinnati as a Red. What a gift. What a tremendous gift. So thank you. Thank you.
I think I can speak for all of Reds country. Joey Votto, thank you.
High drive, left center field, racing back to the Laurent Bourgeois. The Reds are National League Central Division champions. In the air, left center field. Did he? He did! He did! Reds win! Win! Line into right field. Genius, the first Red ever with 4 home runs in a game. Can you believe it? In the air, down the right field line. Doesn't have a chance. The Reds have won on a 3-run home run on opening day by Ramon Hernandez. A strike away and out away is Homer Bailey. Ground ball to third. Frazier gloves. Throw to first, and Homer Bailey, for the second time in his major league career, has tossed a no-hitter. Oh, gosh. Are you kidding me? Holy Moses, the second player in major league history to hit 7 home runs in the first 10 games. In the air, and the Reds win it. What a dream beginning to a career of Jay Bruce.
Well, 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 look who it is at 3:15 Eastern on a Tuesday afternoon. Welcome in, everybody, to a special and surprising edition of Chatterbox Reds. What's up, everybody? I'm Craig Sandlin, joining Nick Kirby, the godfather of Cincinnati Reds. Surprising news in the last hour or so, Nick. The Cincinnati Reds announcing that they have added to the 40-man and selected the contract of Dunn and of Blake Dunn, and they have optioned Nick Martini to AAA Louisville. Nick, what are your immediate thoughts on the move?
Yeah, this was definitely a surprising move. I normally I can see a lot of the moves coming. I did not see this one coming at all. I think when you take a step back and you kind of look at try to figure out why they did it, it makes a little more sense. We'll talk about that. But yeah, definitely one of the more surprising afternoon moves that that I can remember.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time, for background for those people watching, I was working, I'm on a call, and I see my phone ringing, and it's Nick Kirby. And, to be fair, Nick and I are good friends, but it's not very often that he's ringing me in the middle of the day. So I knew something was up. I didn't know what. By the time I got a chance to get off my call or have a chance in my call to really check what was going on, and I saw the news, shock was certainly a word that would legitimately describe that. Shot Nick a text, and excited to talk a little bit today about this move. So let's jump into it. First and foremost, I think this is a move that in the offseason, a lot of people were kind of pushing for Blake Dunn to be part of the major league squad. But let's just start with a little bit of background. Nick, who is Blake Dunn for those who maybe aren't aware? What are some of the need to knows about this guy?
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that coming into the year, there was a ton of excitement about him. I mean, this guy, he was the Reds minor league player of the year last year. He absolutely dominated last year. He started at Double-A Chattanooga, or started at High A Dayton, ended at Double-A Chattanooga, hit 312, 947 OPS. Last season, he was one of 2 Reds players in minor league history to hit 20 home runs and steal 50 bags. Last player was Gary Reedus in 1982. But this year, Dunn, he started the year on the IL in spring training, didn't get into any games or any even backfield action until late. So he was a guy that coming into the year, I think a lot of people thought had a chance to make the opening day roster. But obviously once he got hurt, that kind of there was no chance of that. And then he went down to AAA, and he started out really, really slow. Hasn't really picked it up. I mean, I think you could look a couple ways and be like, hey, he's played a little better late, had a pretty nice series. Did have an OPS over 1,000 in his last series against the Iowa Cubs. Had 3 extra base hits. But I think this move is more about just him helping the Reds than necessarily him earning a call-up based on his performance right now at AAA.
Yeah, I think that's accurate, and we'll get into that in a little bit more here in detail in a little bit. But Blake Dunn, the number 11 prospect in the Reds minor leagues as it sat today. He's 25 years old. He was the 450th pick in the draft. 15th round selection in 2021. They did pay him a bonus of $125,000, which is somewhat significant for a 15th round selection. So there must have been some level of confidence there, but not somebody that out of the draft was super highly regarded. But as we've seen with a couple of players, it seems over the last couple of years with the Reds, really progressed quickly through the minor leagues. And has made a splash. And now with obviously Reds fans have been pushing for a Blake Dunn appearance on the major league roster here for a little while. So, you mentioned some of his numbers, but I want to talk a little bit about specifically the injuries, which have been an issue for him. I think he dealt with injuries all the way back to college. Right now he seems healthy though. And so, what is your expectation for this stint for Blake Dunn on the major league roster? Is this he's here for a long time? Is this a cup of coffee and he'll be gone in a week or two? What do you think is a realistic expectation for Blake Dunn in June of 2024?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's just really just going to depend on how well he plays. I mean, I think if he comes up and he plays well, he'll never get sent back down. Because the Reds pretty clearly have a void in terms of they need a right-handed bat. And unfortunately, no one's really stepped up. You also had Rhys Hines. Rhys Hines should have been first in the pecking order, but he's striking out 40% of the time down at AAA. Has really just looked lost. The Reds, they faced three left-handed starting pitchers in the next 7 games. I know our friend Mitch, Reds in 4, was probably the first person to point that out. But that to me is clearly why he's up. And I was texting with our good friend Greg, Reds Daily. He mentioned how how I said on last night's podcast, I was talking about how, well, you know what? If the Milwaukee Brewers had to make a decision but to send Graham Ashcraft to the bullpen, they wouldn't hesitate. They would just do it. Calling up Blake Dunn right now feels like a Milwaukee Brewers move. This feels like a move. Hey, we're making a move. It may not make completely sense, but we feel pretty confident that over those 3 games against left-handed pitching, Blake Dunn helps us win more than anything we have right now. And I think that's why the Reds made this move. One point on Dunn, the first time I ever heard about Blake Dunn was back in 2022. Old podcast he did. I interviewed Justin Rock. He was the Daytona Tortugas broadcaster. He's now with New York City, Brooklyn, one of those minor league teams. But nonetheless, Blake Dunn only played in 33 games that season. He was hurt. Only played in 33 games with the Tortugas. But we asked Justin Rock, who is the one guy that stands out to you the most this year? He was like, Blake Dunn. Blake Dunn. He could not talk about this guy enough. Love the way he plays. Loves how much of an athlete he is. And he was just so incredibly high on a guy that only played 33 games. And I've kind of been following him a little bit since then. But this guy, this is the first time. It's ironic. 2024 is the first time he hasn't absolutely dominated in the minor leagues, and now he gets the call up out of need. It's funny how baseball works.
Yeah. You mentioned obviously a right-handed bat has been a void. Blake Dunn has shown an ability to mash left-handed pitching over his career. Now this year, maybe the numbers aren't quite as good as they have been historically. Last year, Dunn hit 359 with an OPS over 1,200 versus left-handed pitching in the minor leagues, 152 plate appearance. And he was walking nearly, I think, over 20% of the time in those at-bats. So, we kind of poke fun at it, but the Big Red platoon is going to be in full force with Blake Dunn on this major league roster.
I love to see it. Yeah, Blake Dunn last year, so he had 31 walks against left-handed pitchers in 152 plate appearances. He had 31 walks against right-handed pitchers in over 400. So he sees the ball way better, clearly, against left-handed pitching. This year, like, his numbers have been down all around, but he does have all 4 of his home runs this year have been against left-handed pitching. So look, he's a guy that especially Coors Field tonight. I mean, he's a guy that's a great athlete. He's going to be able to play good defense in the outfield. I have seen him a few times take a few interesting routes to balls, but his athleticism will make up for a lot of that. So he's a fun player to make his debut at Coors Field. I'm sure he'll be in the lineup tonight. I would be absolutely stunned if he's not in the lineup against a left-handed pitcher. Like, feels like that was straight up the reason he was called up. So, but yeah, I mean, look, he has a chance to get hot as well as anyone else, and it's gonna be a pretty fun outfield if you have, well, really, even if you have Hurtubise out there, but if you have Friedel, Fairchild, Dunn, put in Hurtubise, I mean, that's some great speed in the outfield. It's a pretty good defensive outfield.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with that. And one of the other contributing factors to this, at least in my eyes, is that Spencer Steer has seemingly emerged as your first baseman until CES comes back. I know that Candelario was played over there a little bit, but at least in my eyes, Spencer Steer is your first baseman. And so it left you with a situation where you legitimately only had one right-handed bat on your 40-man roster that could play outfield, and that was Stuart Fairchild, right? So in the minors, you had options with Peyton Burdick, who's already on the 40-man, Reese Hines, who's already on the 40-man, obviously. But beyond that, you didn't have any options. And with the release, obviously, of Mike Ford recently, it opened up a spot on the 40-man for the Reds to be able to make this move. What role, if any, do you think that Spencer Steer has played in this decision, in his ability to play defensively at first base compared to the outfield? I know you're not a huge Spencer Steer outfielder fan, so.
I'm not a huge Spencer Steer defender fan. Doesn't matter where he plays, he's a negative. I love Spencer Steer, the hitter. He's a DH. There's too many guys on the Reds that are DHs. I think Dunn's just he's a better option than what you have now. I think that Steer's probably less of a liability, especially I feel like Steer at Great America Ballpark might actually be a better option in left field just because of how small the ballpark is. But in Coors Field, like it could really get exposed. So I don't know. Like I kind of feel like at Coors Field, if you have to put him in the lineup, it's probably best to put him at first base. At Great America Ballpark, I think he's probably better off in left field than first base if that makes sense.
Okay, interesting. So you brought up a couple points, but I want to touch on it a little bit more. And this is not to be negative in any sense of the word about the decision to bring Blake Dunn up to the major league roster, but certainly this is a move that a lot of Reds fans wanted to see at some point this year. The question is why now, right? So Blake Dunn, since coming back from being injured, hasn't been terrible, but hasn't exactly been beating the cover off the ball. Nick Martini, since being called back up from his AAA stint, again, not terrible, but not beating the cover off the ball. The question is, why now? If you're the Cincinnati Reds, why on June 4th are you making this decision?
It's just to help you try to win right now. Just to help you try to win a couple games. I think the Reds are pretty high on Blake Dunn's future. Again, this is a guy that has hit incredibly well every year at every stop up until this year. And this year he has a 94, WRC plus at AAA. It's not like he's been atrocious, by any stretch of the imagination. And he's been coming off injuries. So, and again, he still has a 348 on base percentage at AAA. It's just he hasn't, and this has been a guy that over his career has hit for a solid average. This year's it just it hasn't for whatever reason. I don't know, but there's no doubt in my mind that right now in these 3 games that are against left-handed pitcher, Blake Dunn would be the Reds' best option for those 3 games. Now, if we're talking over the next 50 games, is Blake Dunn a good option to hold a roster spot and only be a platoon player? I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to see a little bit more, but again, I wouldn't change if you believed in Blake Dunn going to this year and you were high on him and you're like, yeah, this guy has a chance to really be a good player. I don't know if 44 games at AAA would make me go, oh yeah, he's toast. Like he just had a bad 48 games coming off an injury.
Sure. And you mentioned the strikeout rate, but one question in the chat that I'll bring up real quick from Nate is the question again of why Blake Dunn over a guy like Rhys Hines. Again, Rhys Hines already on your 40-man roster at the time. You had a 40-man spot open with Mike Ford, but do you think it was just the strikeout numbers and the fact that this team is already striking out a high number of times and adding someone to the lineup that is also striking out a high number of times is maybe not the best move? Or do you think that there was more to this in terms of the Reds' vision for either of those players?
I think so. I know. Look, Blake Dunn's striking out in 30% of his plate appearances. That's a lot higher than really any other time in his career. He's usually been a low 20s guy. Rhys Hines is striking out in 40% of his plate appearances this year, and that's not an anomaly. He's had really high strikeout rates. I kind of feel like with Rhys Hines, I don't want to sound too negative on Rhys Hines because I think he still has the potential to still develop. He's also been a guy that's dealt with a ton of injuries himself, but I feel like Rhys Hines, most of his home runs are probably from mistakes right down the middle against bad pitchers in the minor leagues. I feel like if you call up Rhys Hines, there's a pretty good chance. Maybe you get lucky and he runs into a home run. There's a pretty good chance the guy goes 0 for 8 with 6 strikeouts in his first 2 games. Blake Dunn, look, he could certainly do the exact same thing, but I think that Blake Dunn also provides you some defensive value. He provides you some base running value. There's just a lot more value right now with Blake Dunn than Rhys Hines. Rhys Hines needs to get hot at AAA before I would even consider calling him up, just because he doesn't have any other way to beat you other than crushing the baseball.
Yeah. And again, you mentioned it earlier. The Reds face 3 left-handed pitchers in the next 7 games. It starts tonight with Ty Black.
I thought
I
it
don't
was
know.
blocked, so, but who cares?
We'll
Hopefully
go with
they
the
make
Colorado.
Hopefully they make
Colorado Rockies starting pitcher Ty. For insight, Ty blocks platoon splits this year against left-handed batters. He's giving up a 158 batting average with an OPS at 359. His I mean, unreal numbers against left-handed batters. Now, obviously, those plate appearances are limited due to the fact that a lot of people are batting right-handers, but right-handed batters, on the other hand, batting 326 with an 857 OPS. So, when we say the Big Red Platoon, like it's kind of in jest, but like legitimately there is data to back up these decisions. And when obviously TJ Friedel, who has shown an ability to hit left-handed bats, is a mainstay in center field. I don't think that there's any debate about that. But if your only other option in the outfield is Stuart Fairchild, and then you're going to have to bat either Will Benson, who hasn't had great left-handed splits, or Jake Fraley, who hasn't had great left-handed splits, it kind of limits your roster ability. And so tonight's a night where you have an opportunity against a left-hander who has extreme splits to bring up a guy in Blake Dunn who has mashed left-handed pitchers in his career and give him an opportunity to try and catch fire early on and see if he can't carry some of that momentum on. So any other thoughts, Nick, on Blake Dunn specifically?
Not really. The only other thing I would say is I would expect Nick Martini gets back on this roster at some point. I don't think this was a move where he's going to be down for very long. It's kind of Nick Martini, unfortunately for him, he played pretty well since coming back. Just kind of the odd man out, just because of his limited ability to, do more other than hit. Like, he can't go out and play good defense. And I think it also speaks quite a bit about Jacob Hurtubise and how much the Reds like him, because the Reds, they wanted to call it Blake Dunn. They wanted to get that right-handed bat. You pretty much had two choices. You had Nick Martini or Jacob Hurtubise, and the Reds decided to go with keep Jacob Hurtubise on the roster. So that, I think that to me signifies the Reds really like what they're seeing out of Hurtubise.
And I know obviously today is about Blake Dunn, but you bring up Jacob Hurtubise. It is interesting and will be interesting to see how the Reds use him moving forward as long as Blake Dunn is on this roster, because you now have, at least in my opinion, what seems to be a platoon of Dunn and Stuart Fairchild when a lefty is going, Fraley and Benson when a right-hander is going. So Hurtubise may kind of almost take on a role similar to, I'm not name dropping here. So, a pinch runner role, late in game bunt opportunities. What does this move mean for Jacob Hurtubise, who is a friend of the show?
Well, Hurtubise can also be like that, the third platoon option. So you can also you could start Will Benson, you could pinch hit Fairchild for him, and then if you go back, you could make Hurtubise be the guy that hits the third time, which felt like the Reds, you've had to kind of pick your spots. Like if Benson starts the game, fifth inning, they bring in a lefty, you kind of have to, most of the time, David Bell said, I'm just going to stick with Benson here because I still got to get through 4 more innings. Benson's spot's going to come back up at least once, maybe twice more. Hurtubise kind of gives you a little bit of protection there. Yeah, I think Hurtubise will probably just be a spot starter. I do think, you'll probably see him pinch run. I wouldn't be shocked if he's in the lineup tomorrow against a right-handed pitcher in a big ballpark. And again, they're probably also not going to want to run guys like TJ Friedel into the ground, who came back very rapidly off of an injury, didn't really get ramped back up. And so it'd be good to give some guys some days off as well. And I think now the Reds have almost an extra player for the first time, maybe all year. And again, I'm not trying to say the Reds have a great elite extra player, but it feels like the Reds have an extra player on their roster that on any given day, they can give a guy a day off and not feel like it's a massive drop off. So I think that's kind of where the Reds roster is at right now. It's just interesting because the two players coming into this year that, we had all these great prospects come up last year. this year there really wasn't a lot of great prospects. We had two guys that we really liked coming into the year, and Blake Dunn and Jacob Hurtubise. They had very interesting tracks to get to the big leagues. Both guys got hurt in spring training, but now they're both on the roster. So it's exciting to see both of them. I hope Blake Dunn can catch fire. Everything I've ever heard, everyone that knows anything about Blake Dunn absolutely loves him, loves the makeup, loves all that kind of stuff. And Reds fans who've never watched a minor league game with Blake Dunn playing in it, I have a feeling you're going to really like this guy, probably like you like Jacob Hurtubise. Different players, but they have very similar likability qualities about each of one of them.
Yeah. And Reds in 4 makes a good point there in terms of, what Blake Dunn and maybe Jacob Hurtubise, but Blake Dunn specifically may have been part of the Reds plan all along. And then the injury kind of forced their hand to go a different way. So he says this move really makes me wonder if the plan the entire time was to have a healthy Blake Dunn crack the opening day roster in the bubble role. I actually don't think that Blake Dunn specifically would have been in the Bubba role, but I think he probably would have taken that spot, and then somebody else could have filled the role that Bubba was filling. But then they ended up just viewing his AAA time as a rehab stint. I think ultimately, and this will be, telling of Nick Krall over the next 1.5 to 2 seasons, is there are a lot of really good young players in this organization. And there are also a number of decent players on the major league roster, and how they manage the trade deadline this year and next year, along with how they manage the offseason and any signings that they make, is going to be really telling in terms of how they view this young makeup and this young core moving forward. And Chase asked the question, you've got 3 guys who are scheduled to come back in the next at least 2 of them that are scheduled to come back in the next month or so, and then Matt McLean, who will be back towards the end of the season, but Christian Encarnacion Strand and Noel V. Marte scheduled to come back. Spencer Steer, once CES comes back, won't necessarily be needed at first base as much, but bringing up Blake Dunn puts him in the outfield and leaves Spencer Steer maybe in a DH role or otherwise. So, I'll ask you the question that Chase asked, and when CES and Marte come back, obviously, in true Nick terms, a lot of things can change between now and then. But if CES and Marte were ready to come back today, what would be your corresponding moves, and what would you do?
If both of them miraculously came back today, and miraculously the entire roster stays healthy, which there's about a 0% chance of that happening, but we'll play it out. Right now, one of the outfielders goes down, so either Dunn or Hurtubise, so probably whichever one of those 2 players plays the best. Right now, Spencer Steer is an infielder for the next couple weeks. He'll be transitioned back to an outfielder when Marte comes back, and I guess CES. So one of those 2, and then I would say one of the 2 between Santiago Espinal and Jonathan India. India's played very well of late, but Jonathan India has options. Santiago Espinal. Now, the one thing about Santiago Espinal, he's less needed when Marte comes back, in particular, because the Reds actually have a backup shortstop. And I know Ellie's played like every single inning all year, but you don't want to really not have a backup shortstop on your roster. So yeah, I think that right now, I would probably send down Espinal and Dunn, but if Dunn plays well, I'd probably send Hurtubise down. That would probably be where I would be at. Because I do think Dunn fits the roster a little bit better than Hurtubise, as much as I love him, just because Dunn's a right-handed bat. But again, these guys are all everyone on this roster right now, you play well, you're going to get kept. Unless you're Nick Martini. Nick Martini's probably the only one that kind of, sorry, Nick.
Well, and
yes, Santiago Espinal still has 2 options.
Yeah. And not to, not to jump the gun or anything like that, but, if the Reds can really make some progress over the next several weeks, it'll put them in a position to potentially be a buyer at the trade deadline. I know the Milwaukee Brewers obviously have a large league in the division, but the Reds are only 2 games out of a wild card spot right now. And obviously, if they can play plus baseball for the next several weeks. It'll put them in a position to really be challenging to make the playoffs at the end of the year. And so potentially you have trade bait there, right? And so whether it's someone like Martini for somebody that's looking for a left-handed power bat, or whatever it may be, you're going to have some opportunities to make moves. So, like I said, Nick Krall's got his work cut out for him. And Alex asked the question that I see you highlighted, so I'll ask it to you: is does Blake Dunn mean we won't take a flyer on Avisail Garcia if he clears waivers?
I mean, Blake Dunn has a significantly higher ceiling right now than Garcia. So I don't think Garcia is a very good defensive player either. I really don't want another DH type. I mean, if you're a DH type hitter, you better be coming up and you better crush on this roster the way it's set up right now. I mean, I tell you what, you better have a 130 WRC plus, or I really want nothing to do with you. So yeah, look, I was very excited about Blake Dunn. I'm surprised they did it right now, but if they feel like Blake Dunn's ready, what do you have to lose? I mean, this guy's 25 years old. It's not like you really have much more like development time. You need it at some point to give him a shot. So I'm glad they're doing it. I'm glad the Reds are being aggressive here. I think that's exciting, especially with these players. It's a lot. Hurtubise and Dunn are in a very different situation than like Ellie De La Cruz last year, where he's 21 years old. You have these incredibly high expectations. Those players, when you call them up, you want it to be the right time. You don't want to have to be sending them up and down. Blake Dunn, what the hell? Call him up. Give him a shot. If you think he can be one of the best players in your 26-man roster, do it. And I think he can right now. So I love this move.
Yeah. Maybe the last question. We'll see how the chat goes and everything else. I know we said we'd try to keep this short. I'm going to ask you to put your GM hat on. If the Reds do what we think they're capable of doing over the next several weeks, maybe not names, but what are your targets at the trade deadline if you decide to be a buyer? Or are there any trades that you make and instead you just rely on the guys coming back from the injured list?
Reds have such a weird roster. I almost feel like you'd have to almost trade a major league player. I mean, unless the Reds just would be completely aggressive and, hey, we're going to make a trade for an offensive player and we're going to send someone like Jonathan India down to AAA who has options. I see in the chat, Brent Rooker. I mean, yeah, that's the kind of bat. You want someone that's just a big bat that could hit a ton of home runs. I honestly don't know what Rooker's defensive looks like. He might be one of the guys I can just say, what the hell, put another bad defensive player on the roster. I hate it. I'm so sick of having bad defense. It's the one thing that irks me more than anything else. But I do think it's just got to be a massive right-handed power bat. That's the only player that really makes sense. Like a fringe player, I just think like another like Jamer Candelario type player. I just don't see how that really like moves the needle based on what the Reds have internally and what the Reds have, potentially coming back. But yeah, a Brent Rooker or someone that just absolutely, crushes. Or the Reds say, you know what, they could say, we're just going to keep going all in with the pitching and add another dominant reliever. I mean, that also would be a way to kind of just bolster your roster and kind of go 2012 Reds, where you may not have a lot of hitting, but good luck, scoring runs off Sean Marshall, Jonathan Broxton, and Aroldis Chapman. So you don't always have to you could bolster an already strength if that's the best available player that's not going to, kill your farm systems. I think that's, and me, that's very important.
Yeah. And Chad, if you have more questions, well, we can't stay on all night, but we're happy to try and answer to the best of our abilities. It's absolutely incredible. And Trace talks about this seemingly every night on the post-game show, but absolutely incredible that over 150 people have chosen to spend their afternoon on a Tuesday workday watching us talk about this move and talk about Blake Dunn. Kirby couldn't do it without the chat. There are other people though that we also couldn't do this without. So for a brief moment while the chat sends in any other questions, let's do some ad reads real quick.
Yeah, first off, shout out to I screwed this up. Shout out to Deep South Commodities, a leader in renewable commodities for biofuel production. Visit www.deepsouthcommodities for more on them. Also, the Game Time app. If you download it today, if you're a first-time user, you get $20 off your first purchase with the promo code Cincy. Terms apply. You have to be a first-time user, but code Cincy, Game Time app, $20 off your first purchase. And then, of course, shout out to our new sponsor, the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation. Be sure to call or text 988, free confidential support 24/7. So not really a full episode, so we'll do a half ad read for everyone, but we'll shout out our sponsors for sure.
Awesome. Thanks to our sponsors. Thanks to the chat, as always, for joining us and being an important part of the show. I know we can't always work in all of your questions, but, love settings like this where it does give us an opportunity to interact a little bit more. So Nick does have T-ball tonight. He's got to take his son to T-ball, so he can't stay forever. But just a couple quick comments I see. Billy Burleson, no more strikeout kings. We have enough of them already. In reference to the trade targets, Reds in 4 says trade an arm for Curtis Mead and pray that the Reds don't turn whoever you trade into a Cy Young candidate. Bob Joy asks, go ahead.
You really want to trade with the Rays?
No, not particularly. That's a risky transaction every time.
That's the get crawled kryptonite.
Get crawled unless you're the Tampa Bay Rays, and then we get raid. What do you think about trading for Josh Bell?
This is the problem. I follow the Reds so damn close. I have no idea what Josh Bell's doing. I know he plays for the Marlins. I think I saw him break the hearts of the Pirates the other day. 98 W. I mean, like he's basically Jamer Candelario, right? I mean, like, is that? I mean, I don't know how he moves the needle. Like, I feel like there's more upside in. I think it's maybe more upside Jonathan India than Josh Bell. And that's like kind of who you'd be replacing, moving guys around, right? I don't know. I mean, it's got to be a big impact batter. I just say you're ride with what you got, baby.
Yeah. Josh Bell, 31 years old, will be 32 before next season starts, for what it's worth. Nate makes a comment that I think I'm going to address myself, but I'll let you chime in if you want. Would you guys be interested in doing a pregame show like twice a week in addition to the postgame? Think that would be cool and good content, just breaking down lineup and random other stuff. If you aren't already a subscriber to Nutcutter Nation, you should definitely do that. In order to do that, click on the membership button at the bottom of this stream. Nick very often does series previews with content creators from the opposing team, whether it be someone that works directly for the team and their affiliates or otherwise. But Nick does a great job breaking down series as we get into those, especially the first time we play a team in a given season. But certainly looking, as always, to expand our Reds content. Obviously love to do shows like this where we go live on breaking news, and we'll continue to do that throughout the season as opportunities show up. Certainly around the trade deadline, Nick will be frantically paying attention to the wire and doing shows when possible. But yeah, as always, open to content ideas. And Nick and Trace or otherwise are always happy to try and do more. Whether or not we do formal pregame shows in the future or not, it's just tough with life and family and everything else to commit to doing 4 or 5 hours of work around the postgame show every day, and then also adding in a pregame show. I don't want to speak for Nick, but certainly shout out to Nick for the work that he does in terms of the series previews when he does those. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any way I would ever be doing a pregame show. There's no way to try to be a halfway decent dad and do that. But I don't know. I mean, the more you like, The more you subscribe, the more you tell your friends about Chatterbox Sports, the more we could continue to grow, and maybe we could, bring someone on that did, the pregame shows and, did them well. But it's always you have to continue to grow. So we've grown a lot. I mean, it really incredibly over just, over a year and a couple months since we started. We already have, 3 pretty decent sponsors. They're all great. They're all great. But we already have, we already have three sponsors that, support us very well. So as you continue to get sponsors and things like that, maybe it's something in the future, but not for me. No chance I would be doing that. As much as I love you all, wouldn't work.
Yeah.
I could barely get on at 9:00 for post game show. So.
I know you went live last night and we're talking about having to help out with Betty, and then I got a text message from your wife. So Patrick Barr, I know you talked about this a little bit last night on the show, so I don't want to go too much into it. But if at the trade deadline the Reds added a starter, or I don't know, more imminently, if the Reds were to bring up Brandon Williamson, who do you see from the starting rotation that gets either moved to the pen or moved down? It's Ashcraft, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were going to make a move, you make it with Ashcraft. And as we talked about, last night, I won't fault the Reds if they just decide to keep rolling with Ashcraft. I certainly don't think he's earned a demotion. But again, if this is the Milwaukee Brewers, I don't think they hesitate. I think they put Brandon Williamson in the rotation. I think he's probably a better starting pitcher at this moment in time on June 4th, 2024. And you move Ashcraft to the bullpen. But yeah, that would be the move for me. But I'm not going to, be too crazy one way or the other. 2
more quick names, Taylor Ward and Mason Miller. Taylor Ward seems to be a guy that I see on social media all the time that people are saying that the Reds should make a move for. I'm similar to you. I watch my Reds games. I do this show. I honestly don't have a ton of time or looking into it in terms of what's going on around the league. But Taylor Ward specifically is a name that just on X.com gets brought up seemingly weekly, if not more often.
Yeah, I mean, he has really good numbers. I mean, over the last couple of years, again, what am I giving up? That's really what it all comes down to. I think, and I know a lot of people will vehemently disagree with me, and that's fine. But I think a season like this shows why it's important to hold on to your prospects, because you're going to have injuries, and you have to have a loaded farm system to be able to replace them. So I'm very cautious with the Reds making temporary moves for short-term gains. I think everything's got to be you always have to be thinking 3-4 years down the road. And if you continue to do that, you don't need to go pick up Taylor Ward at the trade deadline, because you can replace Taylor Ward. You can replace whoever with your own guys that are just as good. So, and I think the Reds are getting to that. I think when you start seeing this crop that's in Dayton right now, and some of the ones even behind them, you're going to get to a point where I don't think it's going to feel like the Reds have to make trades at the trade deadline to be competitive. So sure, again, if you can get Taylor Ward and not give up guys that you feel are massive pieces that can help you for 6 years, go for it. But I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of teams would probably be interested in Taylor Ward, and a lot of teams that, quite frankly, have a lot larger budgets that can replace their prospects than the Reds can.
Yep. Not a question, but a comment from Billy. And I read this because it's important for you to hear, Nick. He says, no joking here. I have longed for a show like this where people that actually know baseball and love the Reds can get together and talk both. So I am a very small part of the show, just fill in when necessary, but I want to echo Billy's comments and just say, Chatterbox Sports specifically is very lucky to have Nick on the team. The content that he brings around the Cincinnati Reds is top notch and certainly rivals any other team in terms of third party coverage that they have. So shout out to Nick, shout out to Trace for the passion and the knowledge that they both bring. And Billy, welcome to Chatterbox Sports. Glad you're enjoying it. We go live in the 9th inning of every single Reds game and do a post-game show and welcome you to join us on that right here on Chatterbox Sports. Carrie Reiner, regular show attendee and chat member. Any word on TJ Friedel? He got pulled from the game last night. Is he okay? Is there any concern there?
I hope not. I mean, I hope that wasn't part of the reason why this roster move was made for Blake Dunn. But I don't think so. I think it was just Reds were up big. I literally have not saw a single thing with anyone being concerned about him. So hopefully that's the case, but I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything either. Let's see. Trevor, the standard.
Let's do one more. And
all right.
One more, and I got to roll.
Let's just go through standard Trevor Bauer references that happen all the time. Shout out Zach Maxwell.
I saw someone asking about Maxwell. We could wrap up with that one unless you see something.
Wrap up with that. There's. Let's see. I saw 2 questions that I think are valid. So we'll do one real quick. Does CES have options? I could see him potentially in Louisville after a rehab or an extended rehab based on his performance pre-injury. Maybe they give him an extended rehab to try and get back on track. That's certainly a valid idea, Jeff. He does have options, obviously, since he's so early in his career. No concerns there. It'll just be a question of what the Reds makeup looks like on the major league roster once he is ready and if they need him back, and also how he performs and how he feels.
The problem with that is CES is the guy that was projected to hit the most home runs on this team. And this team does not have enough guys that can hit the ball to the ballpark. So I think CES has a lot more value than a lot of other players on this roster because he's the one guy that could hit 8-9 home runs in a month other than Ellie De La Cruz. There's no one else on this roster right now that can get hot and hit a bunch of home runs. And when you have guys that can hit home runs, it can mask a lineup that's not very good if they can get hot. So I would be, again, CES has options. I know he wasn't good, but I'm willing to give CES a lot more rope than I'm willing to give a lot of other guys just because he has that one skill that the Reds are lacking so much.
Yep. And like you mentioned, James Berryman asks, what do you think of Zach Maxwell? Carey responds, Zach Maxwell should be playing football, 6'6", 275 pounds. Can you imagine him on top of a mound in the imposing presence? What are your thoughts on Zach Maxwell?
I love Zach Maxwell. I got to see him in spring training. I got to stand right next to him doing a bullpen. He's a big dude. He's a very intimidating pitcher. I think that's the thing that probably a lot of people don't know about. He's going to be one of those guys that when he steps on the major league mound, he's going to be very intimidating. So, I'm excited for him. He's had a couple outings that have been lost his command a little bit at AAA. So I think you want to see him maybe have a little bit longer of a run of success at AAA. But he's definitely absolutely a part of this bullpen in the near future. I would be pretty surprised if he doesn't make his debut at some point this year.
Awesome. Well, look, I obviously want to let Nick get to T-ball and let him attack the umpires and yell at the umpires about not knowing the game and knowing the rules better than anybody else. So shout out to Nick in that. And again, shout out to this chat, 150 plus people watching. I think we're at 130 something now at 4:00 on a Tuesday afternoon or 3:30 whenever we started. Absolutely incredible. Nick and I will be back tonight for the Reds post-game show right back here on Chatterbox Sports. We'll be live in the 9th inning, somewhere in the vicinity of 10:45-ish, 10:30-ish, maybe a little after 11. We'll see how the game goes. We'll be live in the 9th inning. Be sure to turn on your notifications if you haven't already on YouTube. follow, like the stream, subscribe. Once again, shout out to Deep South Commodities, the Game Time app, and 988 for their support of Chatterbox Reds all season long. Nick, any parting words?
Nope. We'll see you tonight. Go Reds.